what we have to believe is that exit values will be a lot higher than they used to be. That there will be more companies that exit for tens of billions of dollars to justify this higher entry price. I think it's pretty credible to assert that there will be more value creation in the tech industry in the next 20, 30 years, which would justify these higher entry prices for VCs.
Hello, fellow data nerds. My guest today is Ben Casnocha. Ben is the co-founder and partner at Village Global, a early-stage venture capital firm backed by tech luminaries, including Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, and Mark Zuckerberg. He's also was the chief of staff to Reid Hoffman, and he co-authored 2 best-selling books with him, including The Alliance and The Startup of You. Ben, welcome to World of DaaS.
Thank you so much for having me, Auren.
I'm very excited. Now, we're old friends, so this is going to be a really fun conversation. Just to start, what are some non-obvious ways that people should be thinking about their careers? You're kind of a career guru. So how should people be thinking about that?
Well, yes. In a prior life, I spent a lot of time thinking about career strategy. Learned a lot from you about career strategy. So I do want to turn the tables a little bit in this conversation. Maybe when we get to networks and relationship building, because you have so many interesting views on that. But the premise of The Startup of You, which is the book that Reid and I wrote in 2012, and then we did a 10-year anniversary edition in 2022, is that you want to think about your career like a little startup, and that you might not be the CEO of your own company, but you're at least the CEO of your own career. And so you can take a lot of the principles and best practices of how entrepreneurs manage companies and apply those very things to your life, to your career. And so one of the key principles of the book is that adaptation is really key in business. A lot of startups have an initial idea and then pivot and adapt their idea as they encounter reality. The day one business plan rarely predicts the day 1000 reality at most startups. And so similarly, as all of us manage our careers, we, I think, have to take an approach of openness and flexibility and adaptability. We shouldn't be too rigid about goal setting or planning, and we should fully expect our lives to unfold in perhaps surprising ways.
But and how do you think of when people think about optionality? Some people love optionality. Some people completely hate optionality. Where does that come in? Because optionality and flexibility are sometimes used synonymously.
Yeah, indeed. And we actually have a line in the book about this point, which is sometimes closing doors in the short term is what opens doors in the long term. And so sometimes decisions that seem to reduce your optionality now will over time actually create many more options for you. I think a common critique of young people today, I don't know what are we calling the current people in their early 20s? Are we past Gen Z now?
I'm not sure.
Gen Alpha. I think it's called Gen Alpha.
Okay.
As I've heard this just in recent weeks. But a common critique levied at that generation is obsessed with optionality, wary of any sort of commitment, long or medium-term commitment. And I think that critique is broadly correct. I actually think many great things can happen by setting up a plan or a commitment that does actually last a period of months or years. I think the key thing that we talk about in Startup U is a mistake. And the old school career advice used to be, go to college, graduate from college, set some long-term plan for your life, and then kind of work backwards. And actually a surprising number of very successful CEOs still actually give this advice to young professionals. They say, figure out where you want to be long-term, set that as your true north, and then work backwards. And the only way you'll get where you want to go is if you have that plan set out. And that's just, it goes against the reality of how most startups evolve. And it's actually, if you study the successful careers of people like Sheryl Sandberg, who I first saw as a teenager at one of your events, Auren, I remember being so impressed by her at one of your forums. Sheryl's career unfolded in a very surprising manner. If you had asked her when she was in her early 20s, do you think that you will someday be a tech titan billionaire? She would have said, no way, right? She was doing public health projects in India. She working for the World Bank. She was management consulting, worked in Washington, a very diverse and interesting and unexpected career that led her ultimately to Google and Facebook to become a tech titan. I think that's the case actually for many successful people. And that's the kind of key insight that we all need to remember in our careers.
So you wrote the book in 2012, you updated in 2022. When you rewrite the 2032 edition, what will change or how will you think you'll be updating it then?
Well, there's this Jeff Bezos line about think about the things that don't change or it won't change in our business.
Yep.
So he has this line about, customers
Like
are always
low
going to want low
prices
prices.
are always going to be good. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. So
exactly.
that
Yep.
is an interesting frame for careers, which is what are the timeless principles of kind of life?
Okay. Yeah, that's probably a better way of thinking about it.
Yeah,
Yep.
that will
You
still.
just inverted my question, right? Which is good. Yeah.
And I think so. I have two views on this, but one I think you might disagree with, so maybe we should explore that. So the one that I think we'll probably both agree with is adaptability. I think that if anyone listening to this thinks the world's getting slower, easier to understand, etc., they're probably mistaken. There's a lot that's happening that's changing the world of work, of course, with AI and so forth. So being able to adapt and learn new skills 10 years hence is going to be even more important than it is today. I think the thing that I still believe, but I wonder, Auren, if you differ, is on the centrality of network. You've been writing a lot recently about, it's not who you know, it's what you know.
Yep.
And you've reflected that one of your own sort of transformations is that 20 years ago, maybe you thought network was really key, and today you think it's less important. I might take the opposite view on that, but maybe
okay.
share your take on that.
So and you think obviously who you know is important, but you think it will be even more important in the future than it is today.
It will at least be as important, maybe more important as it is today. Whereas I think you've made the argument that it's kind of decreasing importance as the world's become kind of more.
Do you think it's more important today than it was 30 years ago?
I think it is in sort of different ways. So obviously it's now easy to find the names and titles of people using LinkedIn. It used to be you had to actually physically know somebody for them to tell you, oh, there's this dude, Reid Hoffman, who runs this company, Safegraph. Whereas today, I can just use LinkedIn and find the entire directory of all knowledge professionals. So in that sense, it's less important. But also the reason why the argument I'd make for why it will be as or more important is I think we have a serious trust issue today. If you survey Americans today and their trust in institutions and the news and so forth are really plummeting. I think with the rise of misinformation, fake information, we're going to increasingly rely upon humans whose identities we can verify telling us that this person is legit, that this company is legit, that this restaurant is good. And so I actually think the centrality of network to make quality decisions in a world of kind of misinformation, I could see that being really important. But what's your counter, or how do you think about it?
Well, I don't know. I hadn't thought about that. That may change my mind on it. I think it's likely that it has been just generally decreasing of importance over the last few decades. And so the phrase, it's not who you know, not what you know, who you know, I think was certainly true in the 80s. The dominant profession were the networkers who basically put two what you knows together, and they got a vig on the transaction. So whether it be a real estate agent or investment banker or a talent agent, and all the movies were about those people essentially, right? And the investment banker was kind of the preeminent, was actually the preeminent profession in many ways in the 80s. And then, very quickly the investment banker got overtaken by the hedge fund manager. Hedge fund manager is much more of a what you know type of person. And the investment banker today, the average salary of an investment banker today on a relative basis is way lower than it was in the 80s. And it used to go investment banker, lawyer, kind of accountant or something like that, right? And now the lawyers are making more than investment bankers. A bunch of investment bankers have quit their job.
It's actually
used to be lawyers, right? They quit their job as investment bankers and went back to the law firm so they can make more money, right? You would have never heard that in the 80s of that happening.
Let me just check, but I think one nuance is when you say the hedge fund person, it's a what you know business, not a who you know business. I'd argue that a lot of what hedge fund managers know is knowledge that's in the brains of people in their network. They're great investors talk to smart people and try to understand what's in their head.
If you're enjoying this podcast, please sign up for our newsletter. Go to worldofdas.com. The link is in the description below. Now back to the video.
So I think the what you know, who you know distinction kind of blends where the for a lot of these elite professions, it's been really great at accessing the knowledge in the heads of people in your network.
Well, that's correct. So I think the classically the who you knows were what you knows because they were getting this proprietary knowledge that other people weren't getting access to. In some ways today, just we can listen to all these amazing people on podcasts. So it's you can't get fully in the brain of pick your favorite entrepreneur or something like that. Today, if you knew Mark Zuckerberg personally and you had a great relationship with him, yes, you can maybe get more in his brain. But like we have way more access to the average person has way more access to him than they did in the past. They can really hear what he's thinking. They can kind of like understand, and so you get access to at least some of like the at least well thought out thoughts now than you wouldn't before.
Well, yeah, it is interesting because I think you're right. That's a good point, which is you can listen in on the sort of inner thoughts of people, and that would be an argument for the network being less important. I would say though that like we all would agree that like there are things Mark Zuckerberg says in a podcast, and there are things that he says private in a one-on-one dinner.
Yeah,
and so maybe it's actually network still matters if the network's super elite and where you really can have an edge where you're accessing the actual private thoughts of the most interesting or smartest people. But like the mass market thinking is indeed more publicly accessible.
I mean, there's no doubt that who you know is beneficial, right?
Yeah.
So so I really was just talking about the relative to the what you know over time.
Yeah.
And obviously that could change. So I think maybe over the last 30 years, the what you knows have been more emergent than they were in the past. That may go down. And this, as you mentioned, this era of trust is very interesting. Like maybe you only trust a very small number of people, and you may just happen to trust one of the who you knows who is networked to a lot of folks.
Well, and maybe the what you know, like with AI and all these sorts of jobs that we didn't think would ever be AI touched. Like maybe the what you like, hey, I'm a graphic designer and I really know how to do graphic design. Like that's actually more at risk. Versus I have this 15-year relationship.
That's a really good point. The AI is probably going to attack the what you knows faster than the who you knows. It's interesting because like technology in I would say, let's say in the social network trend attacked the who you knows.
Right.
Whereas the AI trend definitely attacks the what you knows faster than the who you knows. So if that trend becomes more emergent, then you would see more of a increase in the who you knows.
That's a good topic for a blog post.
We should go write one.
Okay.
Let's do it. Yeah. This is now we also have this like rise of like gig work, remote work. Where do you see like the macro trends of that kind of happening?
Well, I think it's interesting. I mean, I think obviously AI is the next sort of super cycle in terms of how it's going to shape the world of work and sort of who exactly is that threat there. The thing that I wrestle with, and it's tricky because by default I default to rebellion, contrarian, try to whatever the wherever everyone else is agreeing. I tend to try to take a different view. And on the remote work thing, I'm not sure we've seen. I think that's still a trend that's playing out. And what's so interesting to me is like we started with during COVID, remote work's everything. Then there's been recently the last few years a backlash. Just, we're recording this in late September. Just a couple of days ago, Andy Jassy at Amazon announced a 5-day a week back to office policy at Amazon. And that's been widely celebrated. That policy has been widely celebrated by many of the people in tech who I respect. I think it's probably conventional wisdom right now in Silicon Valley that you got to be in office and co-working together IRL to build great companies. And so we've kind of swung back to that direction. But I actually think there is really a future for remote work. I think places like the Bay Area have these structural problems with housing that are not going to be solved anytime soon. And I'm actually still bullish on remote and distributed workplaces. And I think that trend, like it's still early days. So I don't think it's not like, well, that's over. We've all figured that out. I actually think that there will be many, many more companies that go remote or that do hybrid setups in sophisticated ways or different types of people. And I think what I saw interesting about the Amazon announcement was this critique if somebody said, well, it's back to the office, except if you're a really high performer, in which case you go to your manager, ask for an exception, and an exception will be granted. Yeah. And this is actually like this very pernicious dynamic inside all these companies that have gone back to the offices. There's a set of elite employees that are like, fuck that. I've been working from home 2 or 3 days a week. It's much better. If you implement this policy, I'll leave. And now you've got this like 2-tier system inside the company, which is actually like worse, I would argue, than a unified.
Also, I mean, I have a lot of friends at Amazon. It's an amazing company. And most of my friends, their teams are all over so they might be in the office. They might be in the office in Seattle, but they work with somebody in Austin and somebody else in New York and somebody else in Washington, D.C. They're all on the same team. So they're literally like their meetings are on video every day. Like they're actually not meeting in person with people.
Totally.
So like what? Like I'm not even sure. Like it's good. Like maybe they'll actually not goof off.
Right.
And not be on Twitter as much or something at the office. But.
Yeah, that's a good point. I have a friend too who works at a financial services firm, and he lives outside of New York. He commutes into Manhattan every day to Zoom with colleagues on the West Coast.
Correct.
So maybe like early stage startups. Are like that's a different, like there's 6 employees.
Because you're literally like you can literally touch them. Like you're like it's not only you're in the same office, you're in the same room.
Yes, exactly.
That's a different thing.
And then the problem, of course, is early stage startups can't afford the talent in the Bay Area, New York, and so forth, and so they're actually more inclined for cost reasons to try to distribute, or they can't afford office space or whatever. And so they're the ones being more remote. By default, there's the big companies implementing these back to office policies. But you're right. So many of these big companies, they're working with these global distributed teams. It's stupid to spend all this time in traffic just to jump on Zoom the rest of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. And also like, even when sometimes like, even if you're like in the same office complex in Mountain View or something, you're still often on a video call because you just don't want to go spend like the 15 minutes going to the other office complex, biking there. Or
it's like 4 of you are in person, but there's the one colleague in Bangalore. So to make it fair and equality, like best practices, let's all be on Zoom.
Yeah, it's all be on video, right?
But I think the meta point I just make on this, which is interesting, is I think there's, a lot of times we declare that certain trends are over before they actually are. It's kind of like, remote work, like we've hashed this out, like remote was big and it wasn't, and like now it's on to the next trend. And I remember Reid Hoffman saying this once about like social networking. Like people have been declaring like the end of social networking for years. Like it's all been settled, all the networks have been established, and like frequently the game isn't over when people think it is. Like it can sometimes just be getting started. And so I do always appreciate thinkers or people who like actually thoroughly unpack or explore like the ongoing nuances. And I think this remote work thing is like, this actually could continue to be the central trend of the workplace for years to come. And there's a lot more permutations.
I mean, it would seem to me that if you're a betting person and you say, are there going to be more remote hours worked in 20 years from now than there are today, it would seem likely that there will be more, right? I don't even know that's controversial to make that prediction. Yeah,
I don't think so. I think the story of our lifetime is the rise of the rest. It's hundreds of millions of people coming out of poverty, getting online for the first time, getting educated, having an AI tutor in their pocket, and contributing to the global knowledge economy. And so if you think about how are companies going to source talent in the future, it seems inevitable that we're gonna find incredible people wherever they are. And this idea that they're all going to live in the 49 square miles of San Francisco is just foolish.
Yeah, that's a good point. You wrote this interesting blog recently about the right amount of early success, which I really liked. Like, walk me through your thinking there.
So
there's like a Laffer curve, right? Of like the right amount.
Yeah, exactly. So conventional. So I came at this a little bit from the venture fund context. So the conventional wisdom would be, the ideal amount of success for a fund one is maximum. It's just maximum. Like it's like the LPs and GPs all want the maximum amount of success. And so let's say you raise a $5 million fund, you want that fund to be a 50x
20x, 20x fund or something.
50x is better than 20x or whatever, right?
Yeah. I've never seen a 50x fund, but I'm sure they exist.
Yeah. Well, I think Chris Sacca's lowercase capital one, I think, was like a 68x.
Oh my gosh, that's a monster.
Uber, Twitter, or whatever, and like a $3 million vehicle. But the problem with early success, and there's a venture fund that I won't name, but that actually their fund one was like $5 or $6 million. Today they have billions under assets under management. And what happens with a lot of early success is you scale up, right? You say, "Oh, I'm so brilliant," or LPs tell you you're so brilliant, and they shovel money. And so a $5 million fund two becomes a $200 million fund three becomes a $1 billion fund. And quickly you're operating a strategy that has nothing to do with your strengths or edge in market, and returns really suffer. And so
because of overconfidence, you
start to you're playing in a different game, right? Like to be successful as a multi-stage $1 billion fund is different than the game that is to be successful as a $5 million seed fund, right? And so your assets haven't changed, but the competition has changed, and so you can't win in the new market. And I sort of extrapolated this into a life context where you can imagine people who are come out of the gate, out of college or in their early 20s as kind of superstars, and they get tons of accolades and so forth. And then sometimes they can peter out or burn out or bite off more than they chew. And so the question was like, is there an optimal level of success? Let's take a fund context. Of course, you want the fund to be successful, but maybe like you want fund one to actually be like a 5x fund. So definitely like a really great fund.
3x would be amazing.
3x fund is actually still mostly top quartile, top decile venture capital. So like a 3x fund, awesome. Every LP will want to re-up. You're going to make plenty of money. And you can feel good about it. You have a confidence that's helpful, but you're also less likely to prematurely scale. You're less likely, both psychologically, the effect of arrogance, but also like practically, like how you set up the fund, the resources you assemble and so forth, where you spend your time. And so maybe you'll build a stronger foundation for funds 2, 3, and 4. And so that the argument would be over a 20-year period of time in terms of the long-term success of that franchise, would you rather fund one be like a 3x and then be better positioned for funds 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to each be 3, 5, 6x, 2x versus the 25x fund one and then all the future funds suck because of overscaling. And so I think I think there could be something to this, and I'm really intrigued by people who have a lot of early success, but then like can't repeat it or kind of shrink under the pressure. And I'm curious if that resonates, Auren, or if you've seen that play out.
And yes, you think in a career it could be similar as well?
I think I would argue that. Like I can make the counter argument, right? Which is like the rich get richer. There is a compounding value to network and brand and so forth. So that's like conventional wisdom, right? Which is like early advantage compound. But I think in a career context, if you were to tell me, hey, you've got this talented kid who's now 21 years old, what amount of success do you want them to have between 21 and 26 to set them up for maximum long-term life success? I'm not sure I'd pick maximum success for 21 to 26. Like I would worry about sort of the premature scaling effect for that person.
I also may like these things go to people's heads. And so, if it's a little bit more gradual, it might take a little, it's like the child actor kind of syndrome where they end up on drugs or, whatever it might be.
I think it goes to, and I think like humility and a willingness to learn. I mean, one thing I've always admired, I mean, you had a line, Auren, years ago about reaching down, not just reaching up, or I can't remember how you put it for building your network, like trying to connect with people who are behind you actually on the totem pole. Not just, most people network
certainly
by saying,
easier to do that.
Easier.
That was my strategy.
How do I meet people who are more successful? I mean, that's a typical like networking approach. But like, I know I'm actually going to try to find up and comers. And I think that actually is grounded in a sort of humility of like, no, I can learn from everybody. And I might be like objectively richer than this person or whatever, but like they still have something to teach me. I think spectacular early success causes people to not be in learning mode as much. They get into talking mode and teaching mode. And that's really detrimental for a long-term career.
Yeah. It's also like, I feel like the people I know who got like super successful in their early 20s, obviously it's not that often that happens, but they don't really know it's hard to build friendships because you don't really know who to trust. Do they like me just because of my money and because of my success? And so either they go back to like very, very family relationships, or they've got these kind of like very odd relationships where they're kind of their boss, but they're not kind of their friend. And so it's just a harder, and that's a very important time in people. You're still becoming who you are in your 20s.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that's spot on.
Is there a way to like, I don't know, is there a way to, obviously like nobody would ever like take less success though, right? Like there's no real way to think about it.
Well, is there a way to stay grounded?
Yeah.
While being massively successful, right? I mean, I think that's the, like, if you could have the 60x fund one and be really sober about how you plan and resource fund two, that would be the best of all worlds. And I do think, like, I think this is an interesting question for all of us to reflect on, which is like, what does it mean to stay grounded? What does it mean to touch grass? What does it mean to not let success and momentum get to your head? I mean, and I think I'm really intrigued by this because, if you watch any interview with a successful person, they'll always say, oh, luck was a big part of my success and so forth. But you're like, but like, no, have you really, like, do you really believe that? Like, that's the kind of high status answer. And, in Buddhism, where I've been spending a lot of time like meditating in the last 15 years, and they distinguish between knowledge and wisdom, which is like, you can read shit in a book. You can read about the principles of Buddhism or whatever in a book, but it comes to as knowledge, not wisdom. The only way that wisdom is gained is through seeing the truths for yourself, experiencing them for yourself, like kind of this experiential element of understanding impermanence or not.
And do you believe that? Do you really think that's the only real way to get wisdom is by doing that?
I don't think it's the only way, but I do think that all of like the wisdom in the world has been written down. Like all of the best practices in business have been like more or less codified. And yet people continue to not follow the wisdom, right? Like people continue to make mistakes where it's been written down, like, don't do that. This will cause you pain and suffering. And people continue to do those things. And then they realize, oh yeah, I guess I should have listened to that advice. So there's
sometimes you can't, like, I know I shouldn't have like 10 chocolate chip cookies in one sitting, but like every once in a while I just succumb and do it anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think there is, and I think it's interesting. That's like the knowing doing gap, or like you can have, I would argue that's like you having the knowledge that there's a certain way to be healthy, but then it's hard to actually implement behavior. I don't know if it's too cute to distinguish between knowledge and wisdom in that context. Like, is there such a thing as like health and wellness wisdom that like leads to better follow through on action? But I would just say, like, my observation is that I see a lot of people make the same mistakes and sort of ignore cliche best practice wisdom. And my takeaway is like, no, it's because they have to learn it themselves. They have to experience the mistake and the consequences themselves. And so I fear the reason why this framework around too much early success is because I fear that if you have the 60x fund or whatever, and then you go talk to 10 smart people who tell you, okay, young Jedi, don't let this go to your head, don't overscale, whatever.
Yeah.
Like it won't actually,
like,
you won't be internalized.
Yeah, you're I'm smarter than these guys.
I'm different. Yeah. I'm the exception. Like I won't fall prey to the thing everyone else did.
Yeah. Interesting. We mentioned this kind of like connecting, networking type of thing. Like how do you think about it? Obviously, like who is still important. Like how do you think about like how one should be implementing it, or how one should be thinking about it strategically?
I think generally, the last word, strategically, is a good word. It speaks to actually the core tension of this whole topic, which is, on the one hand, I think you actually want to be strategic when you think about your network, whether you're an entrepreneur running a business and thinking about the network around your company, or whether you're just an individual running your career, thinking about your professional network. You actually want to be strategic. You want to be intentional. You want to be proactive. And yet, at the same time, if you do anything that makes it seem like you're being overly calculated, overly overly strategic, it actually undermines the entire endeavor. And so it's this very interesting tension where the people who build like the most effective networks, and I think of yourself as one of them, are people who actually are pretty organized about how they think about their network. They're pretty strategic. Like they make a point to spend time with interesting people, and they make a point to stay in touch and follow up and all the rest. And yet they do so in a way that's so authentic and natural that it doesn't come off as slimy. And the novelist Jonathan Franzen had this line of, the people who are most obsessed with authenticity tend to be some of the least authentic people.
Correct.
Like there's this sense in which, like, even talking about it in the way we are right now, Auren, like just having the meta conversation, having the meta conversation, like can feel awkward, and like, and yet it's important still to be thinking about it strategically and intentionally.
And like, how does one think through like the serendipity? Like, it's like for somebody like you probably get so many inbounds, so many people like, hey, let's meet up, let's chat. If you take every one of them, you literally don't have the time. You can't do it. If you never take one, well, then there's like, there's these gems that you find all of a sudden that so how, like, you just like pick out random, like how do you decide to do that serendipity side?
I'll give my answer, then I want to hear yours. I think it's one of the things I worry about actually as I've gotten older. I used to do massive amounts of serendipity. Like almost anybody who reached out, I'd meet with them. I would like go to events. I'd be very open-minded. And today I do much less. I'm much more filtered. I say no to almost everything. I rarely just do random meetings with people when they reach out. And even if it gets referred in, I'll usually like, let's do a 15-minute phone call, or something like that. Like and I worry that like actually I should be doing it more. The kind of the framework that I have, or that I try to follow, is that there are kind of different seasons of life when you want to have the serendipity spigot more or less open. So, for example, I actually had coffee yesterday with a guy who I know, who I respect, who's in a career transition, and he reached out to me, and he's doing exactly what he should do in a career transition, which is you really open up the serendipity spigot big time, and you go and reconnect. You do lots of coffee meetings, you go to events, go to conferences, go to gatherings, and just sort of let stuff percolate, right? And I think there are also seasons of life where you're really heads down and super focused, right? And so to me, I'm always thinking about like what season of life am I in between that binary. And of course, it's more subtle than just two stages. But I think there are phases where maybe you're trying to figure out a new strategy. Maybe you're feeling a little dissatisfied, a little burned out, and you want to introduce more randomness and serendipity. But I think what you don't want to do as you have more success or have more commitments or obligations, family, whatever, is have the serendipity spigot open constantly, sort of unconsciously, because I think that can be distracting. But how do you think about serendipity in your network?
I mean, honestly, I have the same tension that you have, which is like some of the. I remember. I checked my inbox before this inbox, and you reached out to me in February 2003. I think, if I remember correctly, your birthday's in March, so you're about to turn 15 years old, right? You're like, for some reason, and I'm much older than you, so for some reason I took the meeting. I don't even remember why I took it. Just because, like, well, you're a 15-year-old entrepreneur at the time, like, that's cool. Like, I guess I don't know why I took the meeting, and then we've been like good friends ever since. It's been like an incredible, like, a great relationship for me personally, and I've learned a lot from you over those years. There's probably many of those that I missed because I didn't take it. Right. So I've missed out on these, like, maybe many, many incredible relationships that I could have had over the years. But of course, there's, I haven't done that many meetings with 15-year-olds, but I have taken plenty of meetings over time where it wasn't valuable for me or the other person.
Right.
That's actually the most interesting thing, is when somebody reaches out to you for a meeting. I find that sometimes they don't get value out of the meeting. And so it's one thing if you don't get value out of it, but if both sides don't get value out of it, this is a complete waste of time. So I would at least like for them to get a ton of value. If they're going to reach out to me and get a meeting with me, they should at least get a ton of value out of the meeting. They should come prepared. Here's what it is. And they should extract value out of it. Ideally, they give some value back, but that would be if I'm ever going to reach out to somebody, I will ensure that at least some one of us gets value out of the meeting for sure.
Yeah. Well, I do appreciate. I mean, I think you were generous in not just spending time with me, but also I think when I was maybe 17 or something, you had me moderate a session on ethics and science at an event that you organized with a bunch of heavy hitters. And I remember asking you, saying, like, I don't think I'm qualified to do this. And you're like, no, go for it. I think you can do great. And, I really, people telling you that at formative ages can have a huge impact on their career. So I really am grateful for that.
Tyler Cowen is great at just saying, like, I believe in you. Right.
And Tyler Cowen did that to me as well. And I'm so grateful. People like you and him. And I feel like I should be doing that more. Like, I'm not, if a 15-year-old emailed me today, I'm not sure I would actually jump on the phone. Maybe it depends. So maybe that's my takeaway from the action item going forward. But I think this actually speaks to a couple things you raised that I think are important points just to amplify for folks listening here. One is, I do think actually both sides benefiting in some way is useful when thinking about interpersonal interaction in general. And I think a mistake a lot of young people make on this is they think there's no way I could possibly help Auren. How could I possibly add value? And it's like, you can always add value. One thing I always tell young people is, like, VCs and people in tech and people in business, the media, everyone, we're obsessed with what are young people thinking today. And so just like, I firmly believe that anybody can get a meeting with anybody in the world if they work hard enough and they follow up enough. So, like, I think you can get a meeting with Bill Gates. How do you get on Bill Gates' calendar? Well, you figure out some piece of information that he would find valuable. Information that only you have that's in your head.
Some way you can help him.
Yeah. You got it. And maybe you'll help him, or maybe you'll just show that you are attempting to help him. But that's key versus just a one-way value extraction. I think the other thing to say on this that's a little more subtle, but I think is key, is something I've learned in recent years on network building and relationships, is for really busy people, they actually don't want to do, like, agendaless coffee meetings, right? They're so busy that they actually, to justify like taking the time, there needs to be some transactional reason why the interaction is happening. And so I kind of think of this as like a transactional bluff, which is, let's just say you don't actually have a short-term transaction and you actually want to build a long-term relationship, and you don't want to come at this person saying, I just want to do business with you and then never talk to you again. You still, for purposes of like getting on the calendar, need to have something specific that is the purpose. Actually, doing a podcast conversation is an example of like a transaction, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Like it's kind of hard. It's like harder to ask someone to catch up for an hour than to say, hey, let's record a podcast.
Yeah.
Similarly, like,
this is great. Like, I'm glad we're catching up.
It's basically like we're just catching up. It's like, this is like the way that both of us can justify it being on our calendar for an hour, right? And then there's lots of things that you can do, I think, to kind of come up with a transactional reason. And so I found, like, despite the reason this is nuanced is the general advice is don't be transactional, be long-term, build authentic relationships and so forth. But then the nuance is you actually need to be a little bit transactional to schedule shit to get the kind of wheels turning in the relationship. Yeah. And then once you're in the interaction, you don't have to be transactional while talking to the person, right?
Well, I still think it's helpful to like have an agenda like that you're going to follow, like, and then, okay, here's what I think is tough is like if you reach out to somebody to meet with them, maybe somebody you don't know that well or whatever, or maybe somebody you don't know at all. You want to be able to say, okay, I have this thing I'm trying to. I'm either I want some value from you, Ben, and this is the specific thing I think you can help me on. And that's because sometimes people are like, hey, I need your help on this thing, but then you're like, well, I don't even know how I'm going to be able to help you. And the worst case scenario is you talk to them for 30 minutes, you don't help them at all.
Right.
So at least they should have some sort of plan, and then you should be able to agree, oh yeah, I probably could help you there. That's great. And maybe helping them only takes 3 minutes of the 30-minute conversation or something. And then there's like, okay, maybe we have other ways of doing that. Or, hey, I'm going to, I want to help you, Ben, and then they could show you some value as well. Yes,
indeed. Well put.
Now, okay, I might be the second most famous Hoffman that you hang out with. You also hang out with Reid Hoffman. No relationship to me, unfortunately. What are some of the more counterintuitive lessons you've learned from him?
Well, I spent a couple of years working on books with Reid, and then a couple of years as chief of staff, sort of setting up an initial organization for him, separate from LinkedIn and Greylock, to kind of advance his interests and activities across a set of things. And I learned a ton. I wrote an essay called 10,000 Hours with Reid Hoffman, which I document a lot of lessons learned. Yeah. So there's so many things I've learned from him. Actually, I think about this with a lot of people I've learned from, where it's like, I'm not even sure I could disentangle like what I've learned. Like, it's just so deep, it's kind of sinks in so deeply across so many fronts. It's almost like it's pure absorption more than tactical. But if I had to pull out one thing on Reid, and something that I still need to get better at, is he's very good at having people in his orbit with whom he doesn't agree fully, or might not have a massive amount of overlap or so forth. But there's an element of what they do or what they think that he finds really redeeming and valuable, and he maintains the friendship. So he actually has so he once told me, I once asked him like how after Microsoft bought LinkedIn, whether he felt sad about that. And he once told me that he thinks of emotions like an 8-ball, where you can kind of like turn the 8-ball. There's usually experiences have many emotions built in at once. And so yes, sadness was an emotion, but you can turn it, and there's also excitement, there's also pride, there's also lots of things. And so, I sort of sometimes think of him with the 8-ball, or like that, the turning of the 8-ball similarly, in this regard, which is like sometimes people in your life are annoying or have some flaw or weakness. But if you turn it, if you view it from a different perspective, you can see, oh, actually, they have this attribute or quality or personality trait or interest that's actually really exciting or valuable or worthwhile. And so my problem is I'm more inclined to like just dismiss people or just sort of say, look, you have this one flaw or problem that's so annoying to me, I just like don't want to spend any more time with you.
Yeah.
Whereas Reid will actually like accept quite a bit of that in pursuit of the really redeeming, awesome quality. Yeah, exact strengths. Yeah, he'll overlook weaknesses basically. And so he has some people who he works with, or people who have like all sorts of problems and major weaknesses. And some people are like, Reid, why are you spending time with this person? He's like, well, because their particular strength on this particular vector is so stupendous then it's worth having them in orbit.
Yeah, that's it's interesting. A lot of successful people are like that, where they have these people in their orbit who are, quite flawed, like incredibly flawed people. But they are able to find this kind of like redeeming quality somewhere in that person, because they're just so world class at this very, very specific thing. And maybe
And,
these successful people are just good at finding that thing. They're good at talent spotting in that way.
yes, and I think it's a really good insight, because if it is a broader phenomenon, which I hadn't thought about until now. One other explanation could be that because they're high status or wealthy or powerful, they're actually able to withstand the criticism that gets levied at them for affiliating or associating with this flawed person. And
Mm,
they can say, look, I know you don't like my friend Jane, but I don't care. Like,
right.
and so whereas most of us, like us mere civilians, if we got a lot of criticism for being friends with somebody or having someone in our orbit who's flawed, we might say, well, I actually have to really listen to that criticism, because,
Yeah. Or
I'm more
just try to
subject.
justify it in some
I just
sort of
justify it
way.
because,
Yeah.
like, I have to care more about what people think, in a
Yeah.
sense. These sort of like billionaire moguls can say, I don't really give a shit. Oh, fine, you like me less, you respect me less, you don't want to give me money more. I don't care. I have all the money, I have all the power.
Yeah.
I'm still going to be friends with this person. And I
Yeah.
think that so maybe it is actually more common than I realized among these sorts of people.
Or it's hard to know if there's which correlation and causation, because maybe they're successful. Part of the reason they're successful is because they've been able to find these like pockets of innovation that other people would dismiss, because they don't want to associate with, someone who's got, like,
Yeah.
I really hate being around people who are always late to things. And so that for me, that's a very like, but like, that's in some ways like a very, who cares if that person is really brilliant at some other thing? It just rubs me the wrong way. And maybe I missed out on working on these like pure geniuses who are great at other things.
That's well put. The causality question is interesting, because maybe some of the most brilliant, profound thinkers on Earth today also have these flaws that cause most people to dismiss them out of hand.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And then even if they are, and a lot of people, it's like, even people who have like the most amazing insights, they, it's like kind of like the people who like, one of the guys who discovered DNA or something like that had some like huge, crazy flaws and other types of things. So you can be like great at one thing, and if you're friends with that person, hopefully you can filter. You could say, okay, I'll take the DNA thing, but I won't take your like crazy other conspiracies over here or something. And
Yeah.
you can take the you can try to be that filter. You don't have to take everything somebody throws at you.
Well, I think that's right. Actually, something I think you do that really well. I remember having coffee with you once or like lunch in San Francisco years ago, and I remember invoking us. I think I told you, like, the Wall Street Journal recently wrote an article about X, and your response was, I don't believe that. Which I can't remember what the topic was, but I remember thinking, wow, that's like be one sign of sophistication or independent thought is actually like evaluating every assertion individually, and not just saying, oh, well, because the Wall Street Journal asserted something, it must be true. Or
Oh, interesting.
because like some smart, powerful person has some belief, that must be the right belief. Like taking each individual, like interacting with the atomic world of like, let's look at every atomic unit and see if I agree or disagree. And I think like world-class people are able to like look at a person and say they have 99 beliefs that are completely bogus, but this one belief is really interesting and really true. And whereas many of us are instead tempted to like wholesale accept credit, that is that an outlet or a person's fully credible in everything, or dismiss somebody as uncredible in everything. And I think being able to be more nuanced about it is a real superpower.
Yeah. And by the way, like most of us do that with our family members, because you can't like, you don't fire your family member. So you've got this crazy Uncle Fred. He's got like, he's got some serious flaws or something like that, but you still love him because he's your family member, and you still, and he's got some other redeeming qualities out there.
Yeah.
So we're kind of used to that but then yeah. And no one will judge you. Okay, well, you have this crazy Uncle Fred. Like, he's your uncle. Like, that's just the way it is, right?
Yes, yeah, that's a great analogy. I think that's more people should apply that way of thinking to people in their professional network.
Yeah. Now, speaking of profession stuff, on the venture capital firm, that's your full-time job. We're at a point where like early stage valuations are still like super sky high. I mean, they're probably even higher than they were at the 2021 peak. And of course, we have these like super giant seed rounds like Mistral or like the SSI, the $1 billion valuation with the AI stuff that's going. What is happening right now in the market? And do you think this is sustainable? Do you think this is okay? Like, where do you see it going?
Well, I'm not sure early stage valuations are higher than the ZERP peak.
Okay.
I think they have come down. I think there is data from Carta and so on to support the fact that
really?
they've come
Okay.
down. I
Because
think
like the YC ones still seem like they're in a different stratosphere.
Well, yeah, totally. And YC has a dynamic around it. I think like a typical company coming out of YC today will target raising at 15 or 20 post. And that's
minimum,
in part,
it seems. Yeah.
Minimum. And that's in part because of the new YC deal with the uncapped note that YC puts in, that's kind of forcing founders to raise more at higher prices to sort of make the dilution math work. Which is an outcome that everyone anticipated when YC introduced the new deal. And I think the problem with it is if founders raise money at too high a valuation earlier in their journey, it limits their ability to raise future quality rounds. And I get that founders think this is just VCs advocating their interest, but like, Mark Lohr from Jet.com wrote a great post, and like the biggest mistake he made at Jet is like raising money at too high valuations. It can create problems down the road.
Oh yeah,
so I don't think it's just VC self-interest.
Yeah, and raising too much money. Because often you'll still give away the same percentage. You just raise a lot more money.
You raise too much money. And and again, it's interesting to circle back to our knowledge versus wisdom thing. Like, yes, you can read the article that says, don't let your burn get out of control until you have product market fit. But like the money's sitting in your bank account, like no matter how you try to do it, like founders end up spending that money. Like you just
100%. There's no, it's just like, it's too big of a force. You can't just like let it earn interest.
Yeah, it's like burning. Yeah, exactly. So I think what we're seeing in valuations, the sort of obvious thing to point out is that there's AI and there's not AI deals, and
so everything today is AI, right?
Of course, everyone's well, hey, just add .ai to your domain name, you're an AI company. But in terms of like the true Gen AI kind of stuff, we're seeing in a Village, we lead pre-seed and seed rounds of Village Global. We see those AI centric deals often clearing 20 post for pre-seed or seed rounds, even with zero traction, no revenue, and so forth. But for the non-AI deals, we're still our average like entry price will be $7.5 to $10 million post money valuation. So we think there are plenty of those deals to do. It means that you have to be great at discovering founders at the very beginning of their journey, and that's hard to do. And so I think you have to have a strategy of inception stage discovery to do lower cost entry price venture investing. If you don't want to have a strategy around that and you just want to play an access game, then you're going to enter at seed and Series A, north of 20 post.
Interesting. How do you think about like when like in the kind of mid 2000s, like the average deal was maybe 5 posts or something. The average kind of seed stage deal, you made it raise $1 million on 5 posts. That was pretty common back then. Maybe if you're really good, you're $1 million on 5 pre or something, right, and have a little less dilution.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you think of it, if you just think like the tech world has grown at least 10% a year since then, we're at 18 years. So that would be at least a 4x turn, right? So it'd be more than a 4x turn. So it should, like, even if you just think of just normally, it should be over, like that same deal should be at 20 post today than it is. That if that 10% actually leads, if actually the value, the exit valuations are at 10% what they were kind of in the past.
Well, I think and actually Village, our mutual friend Mark Pincus did a fireside chat with me, and it's on YouTube if people want to watch, where he talks about the early financing rounds of Zynga. And I think like the Zynga, and Mark was like a repeat founder. I think he had taken a company public, right, when he started Zynga. So he was not like a first-time founder. I think like the first thing, the Zynga round was like at 5 post or something, like the seed round. Yeah. And so it's completely bonkers where we are today by comparison. I think.
Or is it? I mean, again, 10%. If it was 10% a year, it would be pretty normal.
Correct. So one of two things will happen. Either the asset class will produce horribly in company vintages. That's one option. Obviously, neither you nor I would believe that because we're running venture funds or are in the venture business in different ways. So what we have to believe is that exit values will be a lot higher than they used to be.
Yeah.
That there will be more companies that exit for tens of billions of dollars
Right.
to justify this higher entry price. And I think if you look at
Because
software in the
if you're
world
paying 4x more at the
on the
entry,
you
you
have to
got to
have
get
4x
4x more on the exit.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, but some of those venture firms did super well. Maybe you get 3x more on the exit, and you still do okay or something, right?
Yeah, like I have a friend who believes like, well, VCs just made too much money in the last 30 years. Like it wasn't efficient. Like, so, oh, boo-hoo, VCs can make a little less money.
That's fair.
But that could happen. That could be an outcome. But I think generally it's not hard to tell a story about why there'll be larger tech outcomes in the years to come and why every business is becoming a tech business, software and AI transforming every industry, blah, blah, blah. So I think it's pretty credible to assert that there will be more value creation in the tech industry in the next 20, 30 years, which would justify these higher entry prices for VCs.
Now, one of your innovation when you guys were founding the firm is you kind of like pioneered this like more of a scout program, or at least scaled it up more than most other firms. Like, how do you think about scaling that, and what were your kind of lessons learned from that?
Well, it points back to your comment on entry price and finding founders at the beginning of their journey. So the premise of a scout program for venture is that you can empower non-professional, non-full-time people, i.e. professors, other founders, angel investors, operators, executives, and you can empower them with capital to go back their smartest friends. And what's contrarian about this strategy is most people think that the only way you do good investing is you put the money in the hands of full-time professional investors. But in seed stage venture, what we discovered is that a lot of founders' first phone call when they're starting a company is not to the big bad VC. It's to a fellow founder friend. It's to their professor. It's to their former boss. And it's those are the people who are the first call. Yeah. And so the idea is if you want to get in that very first round, you have to have partnerships and capital in the hands of people who are the first call angels or first call GPs. And so at Village, we run a somewhat decentralized network where we're working closely with people who we believe are first call for founders across different venture categories, cybersecurity, enterprise SaaS, whatever. Yeah. And then it's in partnership with their conviction that we will invest in that company. I think one of the things we've learned about managing this kind of network is people are motivated to participate in a network like ours for different reasons. Some of them care a lot about making money in economics. Some of them care about the status dynamics of being in an elite community. Yeah. And then there's everything in between. And so one of the reasons why communities and networks are hard to scale is because I do think to do them well, you have to kind of take a bespoke white glove approach to how you interact with these individual network nodes. You have to meet them where they are. Are they really keen on exclusive event invitations? Okay, that's what you're gonna have to do. Are they keen on learning from other people? Are they trying to build more friendships? Like, what's driving them to engage in the network? It's too simplistic to think, oh, just share carry with them or give them a spiff of cash if you do a deal, and that's all that matters. Like a lot of people who are doing investing already made some money, frankly, and so there's other things that work.
Interesting. And then you obviously have many more, probably an order of magnitude more scouts than you have people on your team. So like, how do you manage them? Like, is it like, do you have in some ways like a customer success person in your firm that manages them? And
so it's a good way to think about it. Or you can think about it like each of the full-time employees at Village and full-time investors will oversee a set of relationships in the community and kind of be their point of contact. So you do have to add bodies at HQ to scale a network, but obviously it's not linear. So each person can manage more than just one other relationship. And so, yes, we do work with many more people in the network than we have employees. But at Village today, we have 13 full-time people, and many of us are responsible for different cohorts of angels and other people we call our network investors.
And for these scouts that are out there, I assume like you can have a scenario where like someone doesn't refer any deals for a whole year or something like that because they just don't see anything worth referring to you, right? And then they I guess you have to ping them every once in a while. I don't even know how it works. And then of course you have ones that refer deals that are not good too, I presume, right?
Right. Yeah. And so the sort of deeper way we think about it is a lot of the people we're partnering with are experts in different product dynamics or market dynamics. And what we at Village HQ are world-class at is founder evaluation, talent evaluation across categories because we're a generalist fund. So our network investors tend to be people who are specialists in different categories. And then at Village HQ, we're adding a talent lens to that analysis to make together a really great investment decision. But yeah, you have to cultivate this network. And you're right, not everyone, because these are not full-time investors, they often have other jobs. Sometimes they won't do a deal for a long time. And of course, you want to be careful that you're not like checking in with them in a way that causes them to just do a deal to do a deal. And so cultivating this is actually really hard, which is why, I think every venture firm says they have a network strategy. We say Village is network native because since the very beginning of the firm, we've been focused on doing this very subtle work of creating an ecosystem and checking in and building relationships. It's a lot harder than people think it is for a lot of these reasons.
You mentioned you're really good at evaluating the founders. Is there some sort of formula? Like, how does one do that? How do you know? Because of course, that is at the stage that you're investing in. It is the most important thing. You don't have a lot to go by at that point. There's not a lot of history in the company, at least. Like, what do you do to evaluate the people?
Well, I think it's a fascinating question. It's its own hour-long conversation, and I think you and I both have learned a lot from our mutual friends like Tyler Cowen, Graham Duncan, and others who have written, Patrick Hulse, and other people who have written on this topic. And I'm a student of all their work. I think here's what I'd say about talent evaluation in the venture context. A lot of VCs and investors are very sloppy and lack rigor when they do founder quality evaluation. They apply rigor when they do market analysis, right? They'll actually do a TAM analysis. They'll think like that. They'll apply rigor when they think about product. Like they'll actually use the product, they'll rate the product, and so forth. But they're very sloppy when it comes to founder quality. I was talking to a friend of mine who works at a well-known top-tier venture firm, and they said the most overused word inside our firm is the word special with respect to founders. They sit around during investment team meetings and say, oh, this person's a really special founder. And no one knows what the hell special means. And so they quickly pivot the conversation back to product and market because you can kind of sound smarter with more quantitative or analytic frameworks when talking about those things.
It's also I feel like you can kind of understand the company by looking at the deck and the numbers, and you don't have to meet and so not everyone in the firm meets the founders, but it's like, is there a way to understand the founders without meeting them? Like, is there a way to have that discussion? Because if only, let's say, 2 of the 13 of you have met the founders, how do you actually have that discussion around the founders?
It's such a great insight, Auren. I hadn't thought about that particular dimension to this, which is yes, product and market information can be easily circulated inside of a firm and everyone can kind of get up to speed. Whereas this sort of effervescent sense of founder talent evaluation is hard to kind of translate. I am hopeful, at Village, we tend to record most of the pitch meetings we do with founders. They automatically get summarized. We don't actually record the video. We just get the transcript and summary. I could see a world where we record video and where with better AI editing and mashups, what you could circulate is the 5-minute highlight reel of the hour pitch to get all of your colleagues to sort of feel
that would be good.
The energy of the founder, right? I do think recording meetings, every interview we do when we hire people at Village, we use our portfolio company MetaView to record interviews. It's really game changing to get better at interviewing and have all of your colleagues on the same page about what other people have already asked them and to make sure you cover new ground or come back to delicate topics. So anyway, I think there will be opportunities to be more rigorous around this particular dimension of getting people on the same page around the founder interviews. But one thing I would say just in terms of the process of evaluating founder talent is I think what we're trying to do more of at Village is develop a scorecard, write down the criteria we're looking for in founders, and rate founders 1 through 5 on those criteria. Let's not that
on each criteria, not just overall 1 through 5, but on each criteria.
Okay, so what we do today is we actually just do overall 1 through 5 on the criteria, and then we check a box on the sub criteria. So we don't actually sub-rate the criteria.
Okay.
So
is this person, incredible, charismatic or something? Yes or no?
Kind of thing, the history of, incredible at iteration and moving quickly. Founder market fit. Like, are they put on this earth to work on this business? Are they obsessed with this problem area, which is distinct from mere passion? They should have encyclopedic knowledge on the thing they're building, right? They should be teaching you constantly about every element of the thing they're working on, right?
Yeah.
Do they reference well? People who've worked with them well, and worked with them a lot in the past. Do they vouch for this person? So it's looking for those criteria. So this isn't rocket science, a checklist it's not rocket science. Atul Gawande wrote a great book on checklists. Like, but like, it's amazing how many VCs and investors don't actually use checklists just to like organize their
that
thinking.
makes sense. Like, okay, what are the things you think do make a great founder? Let's go through the checklist.
Let's go through the checklist.
You don't need to have everything on the checklist, but they should have many things on the checklist.
And like, for those who aren't familiar with like Atul Gawande's work on this, like he writes about how washing your hands in a hospital is like the most important thing doctors can do to like not spread disease. And like, you can tell doctors a million times, wash your hands, and people keep forgetting. And so just a checklist that doctors review before they enter like a surgical room, and like step one is wash your hands. That like increases the incidence. So I think similarly, like all VCs, there's nothing like super profound about what you should look for in a founder. Like, I couldn't tell you a criteria we look for at Village that you would say, wow, I never thought to think about that for a founder. Yeah. But it's like remembering to look for each of the criteria. That's the hard part.
And then at least you can go back in time. If you made the investment or chose not to make the investment, go back in time and kind of calibrate that over.
Calibrate. And if you have an investment team, if you have colleagues, this creates good structure for good dialogue, because then you can look at your checklist, I can look at my checklist, and we can say, oh, Auren, looks like I checked like incredibly ambitious, you didn't. Let's talk about that difference. Or it looks like you scored this person 4 out of 5, I scored them 2 out of 5. Why the difference? Like, so it kind of creates a context for structured conversation and debate internally.
Interesting. This is really helpful. No, you write a lot. I mean, you've wrote like millions of words, or at least over 1 million words on your blog. One blog I liked, you wrote this Goldilocks theory of building rich, where you kind of challenge some of these stereotypes of the super rich. Walk us through a couple of those.
Well, the Goldilocks theory of wealth is basically this idea that it's kind of similar maybe to the success thing, but you don't want to be too successful, at least early on.
It's a Slaffer curve, right?
Indeed, yeah. And so here it's the idea that that there's actually like an optimal amount of wealth that would like most correlate with happiness. And it's probably not maximum wealth. But obviously it's not poverty. And it's not even like whatever the number of people say, say above $60,000 of income doesn't make a difference. Like, that's been disproven like a million times.
Yeah.
But there's some optimal level, and it depends a little bit on who you are and where you live and so forth. But this idea is like that for many founders and entrepreneurs, people kind of in our orbits, it would behoove them to sort of think about life path relative to optimal amount of wealth, because, and as I say this as a VC, we want to back people who want to create multi-billion-dollar businesses and create billions of dollars of exit value for everyone. But if I were to give life advice to someone, to an entrepreneur, they were to ask me, what type of business should I build to optimize my happiness? I'm not sure the obvious answer would be go build a venture-backed startup that could become a $10 billion business where you sell most of the company to your investors and so forth. I think a business that could generate, between $5 and $10 million, $10 million of profit for you, a business that you wholly own, more or less, where you have this incredible lifestyle, lots of autonomy, where you're not famous, no one knows who you are. That, like, from what I understand about happiness and inner peace, and from talking to people, that actually is probably more optimal than
for
people
that makes a lot of
create
sense.
Billions of dollars of wealth.
I would. It is interesting that like most super wealthy people I know do seem very happy. So again, like, I haven't done like some big study, but people are like, oh yeah, they're so unhappy. Like, I haven't found that there's like a massive happiness gap there. And I would say they're certainly happier on average than people who are less wealthy. Do you agree with that, or do you think that is not true?
It depends what we mean by super wealthy. So I'd probably push back.
Maybe at the very, very, maybe the Elon Musk does not seem as happy as he.
Correct. Elon Musk has said he's not happy. Yeah. He said my life is like eating glass and staring into the abyss. And I would say I would challenge that in the billionaire class. I think there are a lot of billionaires who actually who struggle with inner peace, right?
Yeah.
But in terms of like the mass affluent, or kind of like Silicon Valley wealthy, like, hey, they started a company, they sold it for $300 million, and they those people, they tend to be happy. I'd agree with you. I think the odds, it's very hard to do what you did with LiveRamp and so forth. Like that, those are very unusual outcomes, right? The venture path usually doesn't end up that way for people. And usually it bifurcates into like extraordinary outcome or zero.
Yeah.
I think the path to happiness, if this is the thing you're optimizing for, which it doesn't have to be, but like if you just are strictly optimizing for happiness, I think like a bootstrapped business,
Oh, I agree with
or
that. Yeah.
like I saw Greg Eisenberg on your podcast, or and like he's a big fan of this kind of stuff, like these sorts of businesses that he wholly owns. You make a few $1 million a year of profit, free cash flow.
Amazing. Yeah.
That's a really happy life.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and like there's a point where you don't have to think about money as much. That takes away a lot of stress. But then there's a point where you're just like so much in the competitive race where it kind of almost adds the stress. And I don't know where, and probably for everyone, that point is in a different place.
Yeah, I think that I call it in a different essay I wrote on I call the status cocaine. The status cocaine issue affects everyone on the whole spectrum. I think like there's always someone above you. There's always kind of this rat race feeling. And we all have to have a strategy for sort of disentangling our hearts and minds from that. But I think this idea that you don't have to worry about money, but also you're not so wealthy where how to give it away becomes like a major like topic in anxiety. And like people who are very wealthy, like it becomes, they get all these people pitching them to donate money.
You don't know if why they're your friend. Right.
Correct. Right. Yeah. Like why? And I was always intrigued. I remember George Clooney once said that he once organized like a dinner with his 12 childhood friends, and he gave them each $1 million. Like at the dinner, like he gave them each an envelope that had like $1 million in it each. And he said this story with like great pride. I was thinking to myself, that seems like one of the worst things to do. Like,
oh my gosh,
you've just taken your 12. You've taken your 12 childhood friends. You just each handed them $1 million of cash.
Right.
And I'm sure they're grateful to you, but you've just like permanently fucked up your friendship with them the rest of your life.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is one thing to buy your mom a house or something.
Totally.
That's weird. All right, a couple of personal questions before you leave. What is a conspiracy theory that you believe?
I don't have a conspiracy theory that I can think of. So I'm curious to ask you that same question. What is a conspiracy theory that you believe, Auren?
Oh, interesting. I believe in a lot of conspiracy theories.
So what's
kind of
one of them?
Well, whenever I see somebody advocating for something, I always think who's behind that person or organization that would benefit from that advocation, right?
Yeah.
So anytime I see anything, and then someone may be advocating out of the goodness of their heart, they may, whatever. I'm going to stop the pipeline or something, or I'm going whatever. Like it's truly out of the goodness of their heart. But there's often someone who might be like subtly manipulating that person for their own profit motive or for their own geopolitical motive or something. So I often will look at like who's behind that thing and almost always it's not always the case that there is, but there's often that thing.
Have you read Glenn Loury's new memoir?
No.
Oh, it's a must read.
Yeah,
so Glenn Loury,
he's got a great, interesting, crazy life story.
I mean, it's one of the craziest life stories I've ever read. I mean, and like just when you start reading it, give yourself 3 hours. You won't be able to put it down.
Oh, but okay. I'm definitely reading this. Okay.
Yeah, one of the great phrases he uses, he says the cover story and the real story. So he's like, the cover story was I was like this rising professor at Harvard, but the real story is X. And I just think that frame of the cover story and the real story is very true. So I'm with you on there's frequently some underbelly story that isn't transparent that I like you seek to understand.
Yeah, and it's like it is a conspiracy, right? There's a conspiracy to basically change something without people knowing that you were involved in it in some sort of way.
Right.
All right, last question we ask all of our guests. What conventional wisdom or advice do you think is generally bad advice?
Well, something you told me once, Auren, that had a big effect on me was that you said something like, and you can correct this if I'm getting this wrong, something like, 70% or 80% of achievement people are really goal-oriented and 20% of achievement folks are not goal-oriented. Like they're not big on goal setting.
Yeah.
And that made me feel good because I've never been a big goal setter. I actually, certainly long-term goals, I've never really, I never had a goal when we first met when I was 15. I never thought that, in my mid-30s, I want to be a venture capitalist or something, like it's just, and so I just think kind of similar to how we started this conversation about career advice. I think to be a great entrepreneur is to be incredibly adaptive and to seize opportunity and serendipity where it emerges. And I think conventional advice around set long-term goals, work backwards, I can see how it's valuable in certain contexts. And it's not to say I never set long-term goals and so forth, but by and large, I think getting comfortable with the uncertainty of life, getting comfortable with the role of serendipity and just letting things unfold is a real gift, and actually requires a cultivation. I think you have to cultivate that mindset, that ability. But it's something that I try to cultivate. And when people like you told me that it was okay to do that, it made me feel a lot better. So my message for folks listening is, if you don't know what you want to do in 10 years, if you don't have a long-term goal, that's okay. It might even be an advantage.
Now, what do you think of long-term, more personal goals? Like, I want to be this type of person, or I want to be in a committed relationship, or I want to, I want to have this type of, like, I want to give back in some sort of way. Like, what about those types of goals?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think, my friend Cal Newport and I have talked about like developing personal principles or values, and sometimes values can be aspirational. I aspire to be this kind of human.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I'm sympathetic to that. I would like to do more of that. I don't view that as in contradiction with a point around sort of career milestones or life outcomes. So I think it's a good nuance. I'm pretty sympathetic on.
But what about when you're 18 and you're like, okay, one day I want to be happily married in a relationship, loving relationship, or like, do you think that should be a goal that people have, or and obviously they could change their mind later, or do you think that's a limiting thing? Like that's a specific goal that you want to accomplish?
I think that's probably, I think everyone's different, and of course it depends, and but I think generally speaking, I think specific outcomes like that can be limiting, and it'd be better just to stay open-minded and play the game on the field that's right in front of you. So I think a long-term principle of happiness, generosity, integrity, to love and to be loved, however that will play out in my life. That's kind of what I would tell the 18-year-old.
Interesting.
Versus by age 35, I must be married with 2 kids. I view the anxiety that tends to compound in people,
especially at 33, that will start to really have high anxiety if you're not married by then.
And we both know people where just the confidence, kind of trusting the process, the unfolding of life, the serendipity of the network, so forth, can ultimately, like, I know people who at age 43 have fallen in love and of course lived happily ever after. And so it can happen.
Of course. All right. This has been amazing. I knew it would be amazing because, well, we've always had so many amazing conversations. In fact, of all of our one-on-one conversations, this is the first one we've recorded, but we've had so many of these over the years. So I'm really excited. Thank you, Ben Casnocha, for joining us on World of DaaS. Of course, I follow you, not just because you're my friend, but because I admire you, at Ben Casnocha on X. And I definitely encourage our listeners to engage with you there. This has been a ton of fun.
Thanks so much, Auren.
And if you're a super data nerd, go to worldofdaas.com. That's DAAS, worldofdaas.com, and sign up for our weekly Data as a Service news roundup newsletter. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, consider rating this podcast and leaving a review. For more World of DaaS, and DaaS is DAAS, you can subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anywhere you get your podcasts. And also check out YouTube for videos. You can find me at Twitter at Auren, that's AUREN, Auren, and we'd love to hear from you.